every leader teaches you something if you're open to it. You have to have that open heart to be able to learn something from someone. And I think the best learnings are from your toughest teachers.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Looking Outside. So when we talk about marketing, we usually focus on doing marketing. But what about teaching marketing? As we bring into the field the next generation of marketeers, teaching them new skills in a changing marketing environment becomes more critical and perhaps more challenging. So joining us to discuss this topic is marketer and teacher Radhika Zaveri. Hi Radhika.
Hi Joe, thrilled to be on Looking Outside.
I'm so excited. So for anyone that doesn't know, Radhika also has her own podcast called Pod Walk. And guess what? I was walking my dog today listening to your podcast. So it's very aptly named.
Fantastic. I have been so looking forward to this conversation ever since we had dinner to talk about the future of AI. So really glad to be here.
I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since that moment as well. So let's get into it with a little intro into who you are to start.
So a little bit about me. I'm a professor of practice at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And I teach a couple marketing courses here, brand strategy, new product innovation using human-centered design thinking at the Fox Business School, so Go Mustangs. And prior to that, I've been in consumer packaged goods for over 25 years. I've spent a lot of time there, managed big brands, billion-dollar brands, several companies, including Nestle. And after that, I sort of pivoted into the consulting work for a little bit. I was on the opposite side. Instead of being the client, I was the consultant. So a really interesting lens to business. And then I had the privilege of starting my own social impact company. It was a passion project. And I literally mean privilege because, I don't think a lot of people have the opportunity to pursue their passion projects. We oftentimes have it in our heads and we don't really get the honor, the privilege, the opportunity to do it. And so I did. And it was a social impact company that empowered women in India. And it was based on the premise that instead of giving someone a fish, teach them how to fish. The idea was to make women in these smaller villages, towns of India, more socially and financially independent. Empowerment of women and needs of women has been just very dear to my heart. I'm actually one of the founding members of an organization called the Orchid Giving Circle, which is a group of Asian women that helps serve the Asian community in North Texas. And on a personal note, it has been truly a sisterhood for me. Some of my dearest friends are from this organization. And so, serving the community has just helped in so many different ways. And I'm a part of the art scene. Dallas is a very vibrant art scene. So next time, Joe, when you're in town, we'll have to go to town here. I'm on the board of the AT&T Performing Arts Center, so I'd love to give them a shout out, and on the board of my alma mater. So I'm on the advisory board at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland at the Weatherhead School of Management. So my cup is very full between serving my students, serving the community, doing the podcast like you, and meeting interesting and cool people. So it's really been great. On a personal level, my husband and I live in Dallas. And we're very fortunate. Our son goes to college in Dallas. I never imagined that, but he does. And so that's been really a fantastic treat. Although I will tell you that I hardly ever see him, even though he is in Dallas. But it gives me peace that he's not too far away.
Yeah, he's nearby.
Yeah.
My goodness, you are doing so many things. So one question that I have for you is obviously you did 20 plus years working brand side in the business world, probably a more traditional career path. And then it feels like you did a little bit of a pivot and expanded your impact through collaboration in the community, really thinking about how you can funnel your experience and the things that you're passionate about into lots of varied areas. So was that quite an intentional pivot or did it happen quite naturally?
So I like to say that my life has been very serendipitous. And I like that. But I have put myself in different situations without an intention of getting something out of it. Things have just worked out. And it's taken me in different places. And I like bringing that thought into more of my life, whether it is through the podcast you mentioned for my students or just exploring different avenues of learning or getting onto other nonprofit boards. But there's so much to learn when you are a part of different organizations. It's just diverse people with diverse thoughts. So it's been serendipitous, but the one thing that has been intentional is just getting out there and meeting new people and then letting the process take its course.
Is that a piece of the advice that you would give your students as well? I'm wondering, because they probably have this idea about being, a marketer or a marketer for an amazing brand, or probably quite a very, traditional view of what they want to be when they grow up. But you're almost an example to them of just stay open, connect beyond your immediate circle of influence, and see where serendipitously your life could take you.
Yeah, I do actually. You're absolutely right. And I think you used a wonderful word, connect. Because oftentimes, students and young folks will ask me if, how much networking did you do? And, I think the networking is great, but shaking someone's hand or exchanging cards is not the be all end all. It's really important to connect, like you were saying, at a deeper level. And oftentimes we say relationships matter. I think relationships are everything. Put yourself into situations where you think you might find diversity of people and thought and allow that relationship to build, then good things will come. And instead of focusing on the destination, like, oh, I'll get a job if I do XYZ, if you focus on the process, I think it's much more beautiful. That destination is going to come, but really enjoying that process because time flies by really fast. And it's important to enjoy being a student or even if you're a lifelong learner.
Yet your journey of learning doesn't stop once you apply it in a specific field and you're ticking the box. You're constantly seeking out new connections that can enable a different type of learning in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think things are changing so fast today, Joe. I
Mm.
mean, don't you feel like if you look around us, I mean, going back to our discussion on AI the other night, I don't think I have seen as much change as there is today in today's world, whether it is because of AI or just technology in general, and also just the way people are changing and evolving through this development of technology and AI. There's so much changing around us that you do have to keep that open mind and you don't possibly know it all. And that's sort of the number one rule of being a good leader or a great leader is we don't know it all. And having that openness of learning from people around us. And today we're very much specialists. You're a specialist, you're a futurist, and I'm in brand and so on and so forth. I think you just need to know enough to be able to ask the right questions and seek out the gaps. So yeah, a big part of my learning is listening to podcasts like yours, looking outside, and because you learn about so many different aspects of life from various people.
Yeah, and from unexpected places and people as well. So I love the point that you make around diversity of thought and connecting with people who have a different background or a different viewpoint on things, even. And you don't have to agree with everybody, but you're capturing that breadth of perspective. And I can imagine also in your classes, you would get this real breadth of perspective from young people who are living through this complex, fast changing world that you mentioned from a very different viewpoint than we lived through it when we were growing up. I mean, we kind of remember the time before technology, whereas they're growing up with technology. It's a kind of a different, different mindset that they would be holding because of the way that they've grown up in this world.
You're absolutely right. I think they have so much information on hand, and they're not afraid to express their opinion, which I love about this generation. I think when I was growing up, even if we had a point of view, we were a little bit more hesitant or skeptical about voicing our thought or point of view to someone whom we may have considered as a leader. I think today it's different. Classrooms are much more open, at least my classroom is. It's much more open to dialogue and conversation and exchange of ideas and understanding that you may or may not agree with everything, but there is a contrarian point of view
Mm.
that needs to be evaluated. And a lot of it comes from having that openness in your conversation, because teaching is learning too. And I think that's the beauty of having students around you, because they're connecting so many dots through their various experiences and bringing to the forefront in the classroom.
That's a really interesting point then, is how they think about that in the context of marketing, because there are all of these marketing principles that you're taught when you first enter the field. And are they questioning any of that, whether that is still true in the context that we're living in now, with a very different media landscape, with different expectations of brands and corporations? Are they, yeah, kind of pressure testing some of those principles?
I think it pressure tests the relevancy. Fundamentally, marketing hasn't changed. The principles remain the same. The foundation is the same. But if you think about marketing as a toolbox with lots of tools in it, today the number of tools have increased. It's really important as marketers for us to have greater agility in decision making. If you think about customer experience as a tool, and for customer experience, you analyze competition. That's another tool. Today, we think about competition as your last best experience. So if you think about the Amazon package that was delivered to your doorstep on the same day because you needed books, some art book that your child had to take to class tomorrow, and that made your life worry free because you got it on the same day. That's your best experience. And that sets up your expectation for tomorrow, because the customer is everything. And it matters, it should matter, they should matter to everyone.
And the true voice of the customer, like bringing them back to the center of the decisions that are being made, such an important role, and a really great anchor into the conversation of purpose. From what I've seen, a lot of schools now are actually teaching brand purpose, or kind of the evolution of corporate social responsibility, in marketing principles and foundations, framing it as the potential point of differentiation, and that not all brands have the credibility or the right to play with that positioning. So do you think it's more about all facets of the product and shouldn't just sit in positioning?
It's a fantastic question, and that's such great observation on your part. Purpose, I feel, is a misunderstood word today. Social injustice, women's causes, inequality, social inequality, sustainability, all of these higher causes. And there is a belief that you need to ladder up to that higher cause. And they think about it as the big P of purpose. But really, as a marketer, I would like to think about it as a small P. You can bring joy to a consumer by addressing different points of their journey in small ways. And it's a big responsibility as a marketer to be able to do that. And we've seen brands do it beautifully, where they are bringing joy to the consumer in small ways so that collectively it becomes something much bigger. You talked about surprise earlier in ways that are unexpected. As I mentioned, I worked at Nestle before. I used to manage stofers. So imagine a stofer's meal makes that evening just a little bit more manageable for the busy mom who has just come back from work and is trying to provide for her family, right? It doesn't replace the home cooked meal, but it makes that moment just a little bit more manageable. And we've also seen when it doesn't work well. Dove has done a great job around women's empowerment, but when you look at brands like Gillette using women's empowerment in a different context with toxic masculinity, and that didn't go very well for a variety of reasons, execution perhaps being one of them. And they pivoted and things did change. That's the most beautiful part about being a marketer, is having that responsibility.
I mean, I like that, even just as an intent or a hope that we hold additional responsibility. What are you really providing them beyond just a transactional product experience? And I say this in part because I love Stufa's lasagna. It's actually not available in Australia. So when I came to the US and I was, having fun going through the grocery aisles, and I found it, every time I have it, it's a little bit of what you're talking about. It's, thank goodness I don't have to cook tonight. I can just indulge a little bit in this lasagna for one, because they do, for anyone not in the US, just a little lasagna for one, which is ready in 4 minutes. What is your product delivering beyond just providing a meal? a deeper understanding of your consumer needs.
We all should be thinking about ethical business, decision making, and social responsibility. But I really think that the small moments count as well.
They sure do, all those micro moments. So you mentioned before as well that execution can sometimes fail brand purpose, and execution just generally in marketing, I think, can sometimes fail the entire idea. Do you think that's a part of the reason why maybe marketers are taking fewer risks? Once it's out there, they just don't know if it's going to land.
Going back to decision making, I think that's why making smarter decisions faster is really important. I think one of the things that education teaches you is how do you make good decisions? If you do something, it can, turn out to be very costly if there's pushback and consumers don't love it. But if you don't do something and you're status quo, then that can be costlier. So I think a part of the pushback on risk taking is, the higher you are, the greater you have to fall. The ability to make good decisions is getting harder. And you're absolutely right about execution. Execution is king. You may have all the right intentions, but if it is not executed well, it can land very differently.
Or if it lands really well, the expectation is that you're going to deliver it again tomorrow. So this is actually your quote that I heard today, and then I heard you repeat on the show just then. Great experiences of yesterday are the expectations of tomorrow. It's the pressure to keep up with your own success, particularly if it's a very costly exercise for a brand to be able to maintain that rate of innovation, for example, or invest as much in your brand awareness. All of that is quite costly to keep up with as well.
Very costly to keep up with, and to expect the same level of success year in and year out it's probably a wrong expectation to set for yourself.
Yeah.
So I think great innovation comes in spurts, and it's not constant. Know where to harness your resources.
And Radhika, I mean, obviously the way that you're posing this is coming from a place of so much experience firsthand, like owning these brands. I imagine that you've tapped into a lot of that when you're teaching is the foundations of marketing as they're applied in the real world, learnings about what works and success stories. So the case studies usually, are the success stories, but then also examples of where things haven't worked and the learnings that can be taken from mistakes made or actions not made, to your point before. Do you bring a little bit of that into the classroom as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way for viewers to relate is through stories. And so bringing those stories of successes and failures gives people a strong use case to react to. So I absolutely bring all of those examples, and especially failures with brands and product and strategy, innovation. One of the biggest failures I talk about is ego. Brands with high credibility feel that they can get away with just having a strong brand name until they don't. One of the things that oftentimes marketers forget to think about is the friction between stakeholders. What is that one thing that is going to cause you to fail? Or what is that one thing that you absolutely need to do in order to succeed? And sometimes it's a very small thing. It's not just the product, but it is how that product is being executed, or the ego involved with not listening to customer feedback and having your own biases in your decision making because you feel you can do it given your brand strength. And that has been one of the prime reasons why we have either lost products or lost momentum in distribution. So, we talk about leadership in decision making a lot in the classroom. I think of it as soft skills, and oftentimes those soft skills are forgotten in classroom discussions, but they're very important in making good, strong, well thought through decisions.
Because it's knowledge paired with the storytelling aspect. You need to frame it into a proposition that the internal business teams and your leaders will buy.
Absolutely, to get resources. And you know that better than anyone else as a futurist. It's an art and a science, right? There's data, but then there's also a high level of intuition. And so a lot of it is practice, which I think is what a classroom affords to you, is having that safe space, make mistakes, learn from other people's experiences, and really understand what your strength is. Because a lot of the folks in the classrooms are already working. There's some who are coming back after 10, 15, 20 years of working.
Do you find that the people that are coming back and have been already practicing marketing and are looking to just elevate their work, they come with more preconceptions than the young folks who are just coming in fresh?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes, no. So I think it goes both ways. I think sometimes, you are a creature, we all are creatures of habit. So overcoming some of those biases, your own personal biases is also, or cognitive bias is also very important. But I see it both ways. I think there are as many very open-minded people who come into the classroom with the true joy for learning. And I truly mean it, because I think when you're spending that kind of money for a master's program, people really are invested in it. Today, I feel that people are lifelong learners. All of us are trying to learn in some shape or form, whether it is through Joe's podcast or it is through YouTube videos, like, how to do something. I think this concept of lifelong learning, we're going to see more and more of that. And, we're living longer as well. So people are wanting to learn over their lifetime, not just in those formative years of college and your master's program. That was a very traditional way of doing things, right? But it's no longer like that anymore. People come back and they stay active learners.
Because it also means that if you're a learner, then you're open to changing or reshaping who you are as a person.
Yeah, and they ask you tough questions. I also teach an undergrad class, and they're just such an exciting bunch. I really love my undergrad class. As I opened up the question, I was like, I've been asking you questions all semester, so you get to ask me. And this one student says to me, he's like, so what has marketing taught you about parenting? I was like, oh my God, I'm stuck.
That's a great question.
I know. Well, it's so funny how they, again, they connect the dots and, in such a, broader way, and have the courage to ask you questions like that, which I'm very happy about, because, if you have an open environment, then people feel inspired to ask questions. They feel confident to ask questions. They feel courage to ask these questions. So I'm sort of proud.
But they need the permission. They need someone to create that space. So you've obviously done that, which is incredible. And I'm wondering how marketing has changed your parenting. What was the answer?
Wow. Okay. So I had to think very hard. So, my son goes to SMU as well. I was like, okay, so let's going to go back to him. One of the principles we learn in marketing is that if you push the consumer, consumers will push back, right? You have to allow consumers to discover. And when they discover, the idea becomes theirs. And so when I reflect on that and I think about parenting, I feel, at least I hope, I have done some of that myself. And, I've made a lot of mistakes, as most parents have, where you force your kids to do stuff like, oh, eat your vegetables. But when you start giving them a choice, you can either eat broccoli or cauliflower. Now it's a choice. They feel empowered with the choice, and that choice becomes theirs. So I think those principles of marketing, and I think intuitively, I probably was using in parenting, or maybe it was vice versa. Who knows? Maybe I was learning it one way, using it the other. But I think human behavior is pretty much the same. It's consistent all over. So whether you are marketing to someone or you're marketing a vegetable to your 5-year-old kid, ways of thinking is pretty much the same.
You made me think back. So my mom used to be a teacher when I was growing up. And I remember these moments when I would ask her a question, expecting her to just give me the answer. And she'd pull out a paper and pen and start drawing things. And I was like, oh my God, here we go. Just give me the answer. And I realized now what she was doing. She was trying to give me the pathway to the answer so that I could do it myself. So maybe she was applying a bit of her teaching to parenting there. I guess I'm wondering as well, when you were obviously leading brands and working in the corporate world, you probably would have had a lot of amazing mentors and leaders that you learned from. Are you also taking the very best of how they taught you into the classroom?
100%. Absolutely, I am. Because I think every leader that you work for or with teaches you something if you're open to it. That's what I found in my career. You have to have that open heart to be able to learn something from someone. And I think the best learnings are from your toughest teachers. One of my brand strategy classes actually opens with a statement that I have learned from one of my managers. So one of my managers had said to me early in my career, he was like, you are so great at what you do, but your head is always down. You're not seen. And you need to spend more time at the coffee machine. You have to use those moments, those organic moments at the coffee machine to be able to talk about your brand and your successes to anyone that's around. The day you are presenting to the board, you're presenting to your senior leaders and asking for resources. They've already heard some of these things. So you're an advocate for your brand at every moment. What's the point? So you've got to be seen. And so my opening statement of that class is spend more time at the coffee machine because I think that's how people are going to remember what I'm trying to say. And that lesson has served me very well. Being Indian, perhaps, we learn to put our heads down and work. And, we're taught not to be seen. We're taught to sort of take the back row, not to be huge advocates for ourselves, and let our work show for itself. And what I learned is that being seen at the coffee machine is not about you. It's about being the advocate for what you represent, your brand. And so if you think of it in a different context, it's much more comfortable.
It's a difference between being boastful about your work and being proud of your work, I guess. With the Indian background, it would have been a slightly different challenges, but also just being a woman, we're kind of, taught not to talk ourselves up too much, to be appeasing and all of these things. And I think that there's a sweet spot in the middle.
Absolutely. I think done in a graceful way, I think it works.
Yeah, definitely. And a really important lesson to pass down to the next generation of marketers. So I'm so happy that they have you, Radhika, to teach them. I would love to sit in a class if you ever need like a little spy in the background. I'll come in. Oh, you're doing amazing things. And thank you so much for sharing that on the show. I have one last question. What is your go-to when you're trying to gain a fresh perspective?
Okay, so, it's changed recently. I'm a yoga teacher. I have a yoga teacher's training. And so I used to teach at all the places I've worked, just for fun. And then for the longest time, I stopped my yoga practice. It's really interesting how, what you have learned comes back to you. Humans, we tend to learn things and we store it somewhere. And then we pull it out when we need to. And recently I've pulled out all my yoga practices, the breathing and giving yourself time to reflect, to think about what worked, what didn't work, and really just going inward, perhaps, going back in time and doing what I did do for many years, and then somewhere along the way, forgot to do it. So I'm enjoying going back full circle.
I love that, going inwards to look outside. Thank you so much, Radhika, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.